Let's get a little bit into the ruling here. We've got Judge Carney, who ruled, this is from his preliminary injunction. He says, Californians, quote, Californians have the constitutional right to acquire and use state-of-the-art handguns to protect themselves. They should not be forced to settle for decade-old models of handguns to ensure that they remain safe inside or outside the home. And he further went on and said, quote, these regulations are having a devastating impact on California's ability to acquire and use new state-of-the-art handguns since 2007, when the loaded chamber indicator and magazine disconnect safety requirements were introduced. Very few new handguns have been introduced for sale in California with those features since 2013, when the micro-stamping requirement was introduced. Not a single new semi-automatic handgun has been approved for sale in California. So, it seems he's come down on your side, effectively believes the arguments that you guys made. Can you just talk a little bit more about what you think convinced him?
Yeah. So Judge Carney was, I believe, a Republican appointed judge, which doesn't always mean that they're going to decide a certain way. And Judge Carney had not in the past ruled on a case like this. So going into it, we were optimistic, but we didn't really have a good track record. This wasn't a Judge Benitez who has issued multiple rulings on a case like this. We hoped for the best. And in the hearing, he seemed to really want to understand where we were coming from. And he seemed to also give equal fairness to the state in hearing where they were coming from. So it seemed very crucial that we illustrated the effects of this. And Lance Boland, I think, was a perfect candidate for this. He's a firearms instructor in Southern California, and he discussed both how one of his personal firearms, a SIG 226 with a magazine disconnect, failed on the range where the magazine disconnect malfunctioned, and he could not load his gun and could not shoot his gun even with a magazine in it. He also went on to talk about how left-handed shooters have essentially no good options or very, very few options for a firearm that is fully ambidextrous or has a magazine release that can be put on the other side, which if you're a left-handed shooter, you either have to use your middle or index finger or use your support hand to press that mag release. And the slide locks, it's just, you're adding seconds potentially or milliseconds to a operation that is crucial to perform as quickly as possible, where seconds do matter a whole lot. And I think that was huge. In addition, I spoke about how I've had loaded chamber indicators break on one of my shields where it just no longer functioned. So if I was truly relying on it, which I never do, if I was truly relying on the loaded chamber indicator to tell me that that gun is loaded, I would either pull up a gun that isn't loaded or pick up a gun and think it's not loaded if I was relying on that, which I don't, and no one trains to do.
Right. Yeah. So as a firearm safety instructor, you do not rely on mechanical safeties.
No, you physically check and visibly inspect that the firearm is either loaded or unloaded.
Yes.
And if you're confirming that it is loaded, you might pull the chamber open just a little bit, see brass, and say, okay, a round did strip off that, and now I know my gun's loaded. I put it in my holster and do whatever.
Right. It's actually very unsafe to rely exclusively on mechanical safeties, ironically.
Yeah.
So California brought up a couple of historical analogs that they believe justify these rules.
Yeah.
They first pointed to proofing requirements during the founding era, where there were barrels that needed to be proofed by inspectors and had to have a proofing mark stamped on them to indicate that they wouldn't basically blow up when used. And then they also pointed to gunpowder storage regulations from the founding era in some cities as well, which were designed to ensure that gunpowder was stored in such a way that it couldn't ignite and cause the city to catch on fire, basically. Now, the judge found that these weren't good analogs for the handgun roster. Can you talk about why?
Yeah. So with the proofing laws, it's very different to test every individual barrel to confirm that it's not going to blow up in an era where metallurgy is just nowhere near what it is today. Requiring certain features, which is what we are challenging, is the specific safety features being enforced on us, is not the same as ensuring that a firearm is made in a way that won't blow up. It's just not similar at all. And with the proofing laws, first, at the time, it was black powder, which was an explosive, versus what we use now. Smokeless powder, I think, is considered an accelerant. And black powder is just a much more volatile substance. So it kind of makes sense that you don't store nuclear waste in your backyard. So if we ever have a law that we're trying to challenge to allow us to store nuclear waste in our backyard, maybe they can consider that law analogous. But requiring storage laws is not even closely related to safety features on a modern defensive firearm, because we are not walking around with 28 pounds of gunpowder. What we would like to do is walk around with a normal handgun in public or within the home, where for all legal purposes. So the judge didn't feel that those were analogous, and neither did our legal team. And our legal team knew that they were going to bring those laws up because those laws have been referenced in, for example, the Duncan, Miller, and Rhodey ammo background check laws. But they're just, it's the closest thing they had other than banning Black people and Native Americans from owning guns, which they like to have their cake and eat it too by saying, hey, we don't like racism, but hey, racism said you couldn't have guns at one point, so you can't have these. Which is,
did they try to cite those laws in this?
I believe
case?
So. That was in their spreadsheet, and they did the classic, we're not racist, but these racist laws that are unconstitutional, just on their face, unconstitutional laws did exist at one point.
Right. And so the judge concluded he ruled the how and why these regulations burden a law-abiding citizen's right to armed self-defense are too different to pass constitutional muster. Basically, he was saying that, a proofing requirement, which is meant to just demonstrate that the gun will work as intended and not blow up, and gunpowder storage laws, which are intended to prevent, accidental fires, really aren't,
or like spontaneous,
right?
Yeah,
aren't really comparable to, making it to requiring a magazine disconnect and and a loaded chamber indicator, let alone microstamping, which he said was, quote, simply not commercially available or even feasible to implement on a mass scale. So ultimately he said, there really aren't any historical analogs, or at least the very least the state didn't provide any that pass muster.
Yes.
And so that was why he, under the Bruin ruling, right, where you have to, for modern regulations that didn't exist at the founding, and obviously these didn't, you don't have to find a historical twin, right? You don't have to find a microstamping requirement from 1776, but you do have to find something that is similar in the how and why. And
the vibe's got to be similar.
Right. Yes, the vibe has to match for our Gen Z audience.